A long time ago, there was a man named Abram who loved God very much. One day, God spoke to Abram and said, "Abram, I want you to leave your home and your family. Go to a new land that I will show you. I will make you very special. You will become the father of a big family, and through you, I will bless the whole world." Even though Abram didn't know where he was going, he trusted God. He took his wife, Sarai, and his nephew, Lot, and they started a long journey to the new land God had promised. Abram was 75 years old when he left his home, but he believed that God would take care of him. After traveling for a while, God spoke to Abram again. He said, "Look all around you, Abram. Everything you see, all the land as far as you can see, will be yours and your families forever. I will give you so many children and grandchildren that it will be impossible to count them, like the dust of the earth." Abram was happy to hear this, but many years passed, and he still didn't have any children. One night, God told Abram to look up at the stars in the sky. "Can you count all the stars?" God asked. Of course, Abram couldn't count them all. There were too many. God said, "That's how many children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren you will have." Abram trusted God, even though it seemed impossible because he and Sarai were very old. God was pleased with Abram's faith and promised him again that he would have a big family. But Abram and Sarai were getting older and older, and still, they didn't have a baby. Sarai thought it was time to try something different, so she asked Abram to have a baby with her servant Hagar. Soon, Hagar had a baby boy named Ishmael. But God's special promise was for a baby to come from Sarai. When Abram was 99 years old, God changed his name from Abram to Abraham, which means father of many nations, and Sarai's name was changed to Sarah. God told them that very soon, Sarah would have a baby. One day, 3 visitors came to Abraham's tent. He ran to greet them and gave them food and a place to rest. As they were eating, one of the visitors told Abraham, "Next year, Sarah will have a baby." Sarah was inside the tent and overheard them. She laughed to herself because she was so old that it seemed silly to think she could have a baby. But God knew she had laughed and asked, "Why did Sarah laugh? Is anything too hard for God?" And just as God had promised, Sarah had a baby boy, even though she was very old. They named him Isaac, which means laughter, because Sarah had laughed when she first heard the news. Abraham and Sarah loved Isaac very much. But one day, God decided to test Abraham's faith. God spoke to Abraham. He said, "Abraham." And Abraham answered, "Here I am." God said something that surprised Abraham. He told him, "Take your son, Isaac, the one you love so much, and go to a place called Moriah. I want you to offer him as a sacrifice to me on one of the mountains." Now, this was a very difficult thing for Abraham to hear. Isaac was his only son, and he loved him deeply. But Abraham trusted God, even when he didn't understand why God was asking him to do this. So early the next morning, Abraham got up, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his servants and Isaac with him. He also took wood to use for the sacrifice. They began their journey to the mountain God had told Abraham about. It took them 3 days of walking to get there. When Abraham looked up and saw the mountain in the distance, he told his servants, "Stay here with the donkey. Isaac and I are going up the mountain to worship, and then we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood for the sacrifice and put it on Isaac's back to carry. He himself carried the fire and a knife, and the 2 of them walked together. As they were walking, Isaac noticed something. He said, "Father?" And Abraham replied, "Yes, my son." Isaac asked, "We have the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the sacrifice?" Abraham answered, "God will provide the lamb for the sacrifice, my son." And they kept walking together up the mountain. When they reached the place where God had told Abraham to go, Abraham built an altar. He arranged the wood on the altar and then did something very hard. He tied up Isaac and placed him on top of the wood. Abraham loved Isaac, but he loved and trusted God even more. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to offer Isaac as a sacrifice. Just as he was about to do it, something amazing happened. An angel of the Lord called out to Abraham from heaven, saying, "Abraham, Abraham." And Abraham replied, "Here I am." The angel said, "Do not hurt the boy. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you truly fear God, because you have not kept your only son from me." Abraham looked up and saw something wonderful. There, caught in a bush by its horns, was a ram, a male sheep. God had provided an animal to sacrifice instead of Isaac. Abraham took the ram and offered it as a sacrifice to God instead of his son. Abraham was so happy and thankful that God had spared Isaac. He named that place Jehovah-Jireh, which means the Lord will provide. Afterward, the angel of the Lord called to Abraham again. This time, the angel said, "Because you have obeyed me and did not hold back your only son, I will bless you. I will give you as many descendants as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Your children will be powerful and strong, and through them, all the nations of the earth will be blessed because you obeyed me." Then Abraham and Isaac went back down the mountain. They met the two servants and returned home together. Abraham was thankful to God for keeping his promise and providing for him and Isaac. If this is your first time of watching my video, I want to encourage you to smash the like button, subscribe to my channel, and most importantly, turn on a bell notification button so that YouTube will send you notification when I post the next video. Sodom and Gomorrah, Genesis 18-19. The destruction of the wicked cities and Lot's escape. A long time ago, there were two cities named Sodom and Gomorrah. The people in these cities did many bad things, and they were very unkind. God heard how bad things were in Sodom and Gomorrah, so he decided to visit Abraham, a man who loved and obeyed God, to tell him what was about to happen. One day, 3 visitors came to Abraham's tent. These were not ordinary visitors. One of them was the Lord, and the other 2 were angels. Abraham was very kind and gave them food. After they ate, the Lord said, "I have heard that the people of Sodom and Gomorrah are doing many bad things. I will go and see if it is true, and if it is, I will destroy those cities." Abraham loved his nephew, Lot, who lived in Sodom. He didn't want him to be harmed, so he asked God, "Will you destroy the cities even if there are good people living there? What if there are 50 good people? Will you still destroy the cities?" God answered, "If I find 50 good people, I will not destroy the cities." But Abraham was worried that there might not be 50 good people. So he asked again, "What if there are only 45 good people?" God said, "If there are 45, I will not destroy the cities." Abraham kept asking God, each time lowering the number. What if there are 40 good people? What if there are 30? What if there are 20? What if there are only 10 good people? And each time, God promised that if he found even 10 good people, he would not destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. After this, the Lord left, and Abraham returned home. That evening, the 2 angels who had visited Abraham went to Sodom. Lot, Abraham's nephew, was sitting at the gate of the city, and when he saw the angels, he invited them to stay at his house. The angels agreed, and Lot prepared a meal for them. But before they could go to bed, something terrible happened. The men of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded Lot's house. They wanted to hurt the visitors, not knowing they were angels. Lot went outside and begged them not to do such wicked things. But the men wouldn't listen. The angels pulled Lot back inside the house and made the men outside blind so they couldn't find the door. The angels told Lot, "Do you have any other family here? You need to take them and leave right now, because we are going to destroy this city. The people here are too wicked, and God has sent us to punish them." Lot went to warn his sons-in-law, but they didn't believe him. They thought he was joking. The next morning, the angels told Lot to hurry. Lot was still unsure, but the angels grabbed his hand, along with his wife and daughters, and led them out of the city because God was being merciful to them. Once they were outside, the angels told Lot, "Run away. Don't look back. Escape to the mountains, or you will be destroyed with the city." Lot asked the angels if they could escape to a nearby town called Zor instead, and the angels agreed. So Lot and his family hurried to Zor. As soon as they were safe, God sent fire and burning rocks from the sky onto Sodom and Gomorrah. The cities were completely destroyed because of how bad the people were. Everything was burned, the buildings, the plants, and the people. Smoke rose up from the cities like smoke from a big furnace. But something very sad happened. Lot's wife didn't listen to the angel's warning. As they were running away, she turned around to look back at the burning city, even though the angels told them not to. As soon as she looked back, she turned into a pillar of salt. She couldn't escape with her family. The next morning, Abraham got up early and looked towards Sodom and Gomorrah. He saw the smoke rising from the land where the cities had been. Abraham was sad, but he knew that God had kept his promise and saved Lot and his family. God had remembered Abraham's prayers and saved Lot, but the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were no more because of their great wickedness. As we continue on this journey together, I want to encourage you to smash the like button, click on the subscribe button below to subscribe to my channel, and most especially turn on the bell notification so that YouTube will notify you when I post the next video. Esau and Jacob. Once upon a time, there was a man named Isaac. He was the son of a famous man named Abraham. Isaac was married to a kind woman named Rebekah. They both really wanted to have children, so they prayed to God, and God gave them twins, 2 babies. But these twins were very special. Even while they were in their mother's tummy, they moved around a lot, almost like they were fighting. This made Rebekah worried, so she asked God what was happening. God told her, "You're going to have 2 boys, and one day they will become 2 great nations. But the older one will serve the younger one." That was surprising because usually the oldest child is the most important. When the time came, Rebekah gave birth to the twins. The first baby was red and hairy, and they named him Esau. The second baby came out holding onto his brother's heel, as if he didn't want to let go. They named him Jacob. As the boys grew up, they became very different from each other. Esau loved going outside to hunt animals, and he was strong and wild. Isaac, their father, liked Esau a lot because he loved to eat the food Esau caught. Jacob, on the other hand, liked to stay home, and he was quiet and thoughtful. Rebekah, their mother, loved Jacob very much. The big trade. One day, Esau came home from hunting, and he was super hungry. He saw that Jacob was making a tasty bowl of stew. Esau said, "Please give me some of that stew. I'm starving." But Jacob, being clever, had an idea. He said, "I'll give you some stew, but only if you sell me your birthright." Now, a birthright was something very special. It meant that when Isaac, their father, passed away, Esau would get more of the family's things and become the leader of the family. But Esau was so hungry that he didn't care about that right now. "What good is a birthright if I starve to death?" he said. So Esau agreed to give Jacob his birthright, and Jacob gave Esau the stew. From that day on, Esau didn't think his birthright was very important. The trick, as time passed, Isaac got old, and he couldn't see very well anymore. One day, Isaac called Esau and said, "I am old and don't know when I'll die. Go out, hunt some game, and make me a tasty meal. Then I will give you a special blessing before I die." A blessing from the father was very important. It was like a promise for a good future. But guess what? Rebekah overheard Isaac talking to Esau, and she wanted Jacob to get the blessing instead. So she came up with a tricky plan. She told Jacob to bring her 2 goats, and she made a delicious meal for Isaac. Then she dressed Jacob in Esau's clothes and put animal fur on his arms and neck to make him feel hairy like Esau. Jacob went to his father and said, "I am Esau. Here is the food you asked for. Please bless me." Isaac was confused at first. "How did you find the food so quickly?" he asked. But Jacob said, "The Lord helped me." Isaac touched Jacob's hands and neck and felt the fur. "You sound like Jacob, but you feel like Esau," Isaac said. After eating, Isaac gave Jacob the blessing meant for Esau. He said Jacob would be very rich and everyone would serve him. Right after that, Esau came home with the food he had prepared and asked for his blessing. Isaac realized he had been tricked, and Esau was very upset. He cried and begged for a blessing, but Isaac told him, "I already gave the blessing to Jacob." Esau was so angry that he wanted to hurt Jacob. Jacob runs away. Rebekah, knowing how mad Esau was, told Jacob to run away to her brother Laban's house in another land until Esau calmed down. So Jacob packed his things and left. Before he left, Isaac told Jacob to find a good wife from his uncle's family and not to marry a woman from the nearby land like Esau had. On his way to his uncle's house, Jacob stopped to rest. That night, he had a special dream. He saw a ladder reaching up to the sky, and angels were going up and down on it. At the top of the ladder was God. God spoke to Jacob and said, "I am the God of your father and your grandfather. I will give you and your children the land you are lying on. You will have so many children, and I will always be with you wherever you go." When Jacob woke up, he was amazed and said, "This place must be the house of God." He promised that if God kept him safe, he would always serve God. The reunion. Many years passed, and Jacob became rich with many animals and children. But one day, he decided to go back home. He was very worried because he knew Esau might still be mad at him. So Jacob sent gifts ahead to Esau to show that he was sorry. One night before he met Esau, Jacob had a strange encounter. A mysterious man came and wrestled with Jacob all night. In the morning, the man touched Jacob's hip, making him limp. But Jacob didn't let go of the man and said, "I won't let you go until you bless me." The man blessed Jacob and gave him a new name, Israel, which means one who struggles with God. The next day, Jacob saw Esau coming with 400 men. He was scared, but when Esau saw Jacob, something wonderful happened. Esau ran up to Jacob, hugged him, and kissed him. They both cried. Esau had forgiven Jacob, and they were brothers again. After that, they went their separate ways, but they were at peace. And that is the story of Jacob and Esau, how two brothers learned to forgive and how God watched over Jacob. Even when things got tough, we should learn how to forgive as the children of God. Joseph and his brothers. Jacob had 12 sons, but one of his sons, named Joseph, was very special to him. Jacob loved Joseph more than his other sons. To show his love, Jacob made Joseph a beautiful coat with many bright colors. Joseph's brothers didn't like this at all. They were jealous because their father gave Joseph such a special gift and didn't treat them the same way. This made them feel angry and sad. Joseph's strange dreams. One day, Joseph had a dream. He told his brothers all about it. "In my dream, we were out in the field tying bundles of grain. Suddenly, my bundle stood up, and all of your bundles bowed down to mine." Joseph's brothers were very upset when they heard this. "Do you think you're going to rule over us?" they asked, angry that Joseph's dream made it seem like he would be in charge one day. But that wasn't the only dream Joseph had. A little while later, he had another dream and told everyone about it. "This time, I dreamed that the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were all bowing down to me." Now, even Joseph's father, Jacob, was confused. "What is this dream you had? Do you really think your mother, your brothers, and I will bow down to you?" Joseph didn't understand what the dreams meant either, but they made his brothers even more jealous. The brothers' mean plan. One day, Joseph's brothers went far away to take care of their father's sheep. Jacob told Joseph to go check on them and see if they were okay. So, Joseph went on a long journey to find his brothers. When the brothers saw Joseph coming from far away, they whispered to each other, "Here comes that dreamer. Let's get rid of him and see what becomes of his dreams." The brothers made a plan. They decided to throw Joseph into a deep, empty pit. So when Joseph arrived, they grabbed him, took off his colorful coat, and tossed him into the pit. Joseph was scared and didn't know what was going to happen. But Reuben, the oldest brother, had a plan to save Joseph later, so he told his brothers not to hurt him. As they sat down to eat, a group of merchants came by, riding camels. They were on their way to Egypt to sell spices and other goods. One of the brothers, Judah, had an idea. "Why don't we sell Joseph to these merchants? Then we don't have to hurt him, and we can make some money." So the brothers pulled Joseph out of the pit and sold him to the merchants for 20 pieces of silver. The merchants took Joseph far away to Egypt. The brothers still had Joseph's coat, but they needed to cover up what they had done. They dipped the coat in goat's blood and brought it back to their father, Jacob. When Jacob saw the coat, he cried, A wild animal must have eaten Joseph. My son is gone." Jacob was very, very sad and cried for many days. Joseph in Egypt. Meanwhile, Joseph was taken to Egypt. He was sold to a man named Potiphar, who worked for Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Joseph was smart and worked very hard. God was with Joseph, so everything he did turned out well. Potiphar noticed this and made Joseph in charge of his whole house. Joseph took care of everything for Potiphar, and because of Joseph, Potiphar's house was blessed with many good things. But trouble came when Potiphar's wife told a lie about Joseph. She said Joseph did something bad, even though he didn't. Potiphar believed the lie and threw Joseph into prison. Even though Joseph was in prison, God was still with him. The prison keeper noticed how wise and responsible Joseph was and put him in charge of the other prisoners. Once again, everything Joseph did turned out well because God was watching over him. The dreams of the butler and the baker. While Joseph was in prison, two men who worked for Pharaoh, the king, were thrown into prison too. One was Pharaoh's butler who served him drinks, and the other was Pharaoh's baker who made his bread. One night, they both had dreams, but they didn't know what the dreams meant. Joseph said to them, "God can help you understand your dreams. Tell me what they were." The butler went first. "In my dream, I saw a vine with 3 branches. The branches grew grapes, and I squeezed the grapes in a Pharaoh's cup and gave it to him." Joseph listened and said, "The 3 branches mean 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will take you out of prison, and you will serve him again, just like before. When that happens, please remember me and help me get out of this prison." Next, the baker told his dream. "I dreamed I was carrying 3 baskets of bread on my head, but birds came and ate the bread out of the top basket." Joseph listened carefully and said, "The 3 baskets mean 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will punish you, and the birds will eat your body." 3 days later, everything happened just as Joseph said. The butler was taken out of prison and returned to his job, but the baker was punished. However, the butler forgot to tell Pharaoh about Joseph. Pharaoh's strange dreams. 2 years later, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, had 2 strange dreams. In one dream, he saw 7 fat cows and 7 skinny cows. The skinny cows ate the fat cows, but they still stayed skinny. In the second dream, Pharaoh saw 7 healthy ears of corn and 7 thin, dry ears of corn. The thin corn swallowed up the healthy corn. Pharaoh was confused and didn't know what the dreams meant. Pharaoh called for all the wise men in Egypt, but no one could explain the dreams. Then the butler remembered Joseph and told Pharaoh about him. Pharaoh sent for Joseph and asked him to explain the dreams. Joseph said, "I cannot explain your dreams, but God can. Tell me what you dreamed." Pharaoh told Joseph about the cows and the corn, and Joseph said, "Both dreams mean the same thing. God is showing you what will happen soon. There will be 7 years of plenty, where there will be lots of food. But after that, there will be 7 years of famine, where no food will grow, and people will be hungry. You should gather food during the good years, so that you have enough to eat during the bad years." Pharaoh was very impressed with Joseph's wisdom. He made Joseph the second most important man in all of Egypt, in charge of gathering and storing food for the 7 years of plenty. Joseph's brothers come to Egypt. When the famine came, it affected not only Egypt but other lands too, including the land where Joseph's family lived. Jacob, Joseph's father, sent his sons to Egypt to buy food, but he kept his youngest son, Benjamin, at home. When Joseph's brothers arrived in Egypt, they didn't recognize him, but Joseph knew who they were. He remembered his dreams about them bowing to him and decided to test them. Joseph accused his brothers of being spies and threw them into prison for 3 days. On the 3rd day, Joseph said, "I will let you go, but you must bring your youngest brother, Benjamin, back to me to prove you are telling the truth." He kept one brother, Simeon, as a prisoner and sent the others home with bags of grain. When the brothers returned to their father, they told him everything that had happened. Jacob didn't want to send Benjamin to Egypt because he was afraid something bad would happen to him. But the famine was so bad that they needed more food. So Jacob finally agreed to send Benjamin with them. The big reveal. When Joseph saw his youngest brother Benjamin, he was very happy, but he still didn't tell his brothers who he was. He gave them food and sent them on their way, but he secretly put his special silver cup in Benjamin's sack of grain. After they left, Joseph sent his men to catch up with them. They found the cup in Benjamin's sack and brought them all back to Joseph's house. Joseph told his brothers that Benjamin would have to stay as his servant because the cup was found with him. But Judah, one of the brothers, begged Joseph, saying, "Please don't take Benjamin. Our father will be heartbroken if we don't bring him home. Let me stay instead of him." When Joseph saw how much his brothers cared about Benjamin and their father, he couldn't keep his secret any longer. He told them, "I am Joseph, your brother, the one you sold to Egypt." The brothers were shocked and scared, but Joseph said, "Don't be afraid. God sent me here to save many lives during this famine. It wasn't your fault." Joseph forgave his brothers and told them to go back and bring their father and their families to live in Egypt, where they would be safe and have plenty of food. The family is reunited. When Jacob found out that Joseph was alive, he was so happy. He and his whole family moved to Egypt, where Pharaoh gave them the best land. They lived there, safe and happy, and Joseph took care of all of them. Even though Joseph's brothers had done something very wrong, Joseph forgave them because he knew God had a special plan for him. Joseph trusted God, and in the end, everything turned out good. And that's the true story of Joseph and his brothers, how Joseph forgave. If this is your first time of watching my video, I want to encourage you to smash the like button, subscribe to my channel, and most importantly, turn on a bell notification button so that YouTube will send you notification when I post the next video. Joshua and the big walls of Jericho. A long time ago, God promised a special land to his people, the Israelites. But to get there, they had to pass through a big city called Jericho. Jericho was very strong, with tall, thick walls all around it and big gates that were locked tight. No one could get in and no one could get out. But God told Joshua, the leader of the Israelites, "Don't be afraid. I have already given you the city of Jericho, its king, and all its strong soldiers." Joshua listened carefully, and God gave him some very special instructions. He didn't tell them to fight with swords or throw rocks at the walls. Instead, God's plan was very different. God's special plan. Here's what God told Joshua to do. Joshua and all the soldiers had to walk around the city of Jericho. They would do this once a day for 6 days. They wouldn't shout or make any noise. They would just walk quietly around the city. Leading the way would be 7 priests carrying trumpets made from ram's horns. Behind them, other priests would carry the Ark of the Covenant, which was a special box that reminded the Israelites that God was with them. On the 7th day, they would do something different. They had to walk around the city 7 times. And after the 7th time, the priests would blow their trumpets very loudly. When the people heard the trumpets, everyone would give a big, loud shout. And guess what? God promised that the walls of Jericho would fall down when they did this. Joshua follows God's plan. Joshua trusted God and did exactly as he was told. He gathered all the soldiers and the priests, and they began walking around Jericho. For 6 days, they marched around the city once each day. The people inside Jericho must have been very confused, watching the Israelites just walking silently around their city. But no one said a word, just as Joshua had told them. On the 7th day, early in the morning, they began their march around the city again. This time, they went around the city 7 times. The priests blew their trumpets, and on the 7th time around, Joshua gave the signal, "Now shout." And everyone shouted as loud as they could. "Ah!" And just like God promised, the strong, tall walls of Jericho came crashing down to the ground. The Israelites went into the city and took it over, just as God had said. Rahab is saved. There was one woman in Jericho who was very kind to Joshua's spies when they came to check out the city earlier. Her name was Rahab. She had hidden the spies so they wouldn't get caught. Joshua remembered his promise to her. He told the 2 spies, "Go and bring Rahab and her family out of the city safely." So Rahab and her family were saved, and they lived with the Israelites from then on. God keeps his promises. At the end of the day, Joshua and the Israelites had won, not because they were the strongest, but because they followed God's plan. God kept his promise and helped them win the Battle of Jericho. The story teaches us that even when things seem impossible, we can trust God to help us if we listen to him and follow his plan. The story of Samson. A long time ago, the people of Israel were in trouble because they had done things that made God sad. God allowed their enemies, the Philistines, to rule over them for 40 years. But God had a special plan to help his people. There was a man named Manoah, and he lived in a place called Zorah. Manoah's wife couldn't have any children, and that made them very sad. But one day, an angel from God came to visit Manoah's wife and told her some wonderful news. Angel, you are going to have a baby boy. He will be very special, and he will help save the people of Israel from the Philistines. But remember, he must never drink wine, and no one should ever cut his hair, because he will belong to God. The woman ran to tell her husband, Manoah, what the angel said. Manoah prayed to God and asked for more instructions on how to raise this special child. God listened to him, and the angel came back to give them both the same message. Soon after, the woman had a baby boy, just like the angel had said. They named him Samson. As Samson grew up, God gave him incredible strength. Samson was stronger than any other man. Samson's first fight. When Samson was a young man, he went to a place called Timnath and saw a Philistine woman he wanted to marry. He told his parents about her, but they were confused. Samson's parents. Why do you want to marry a Philistine woman? Why not someone from our own people? But Samson said, she makes me happy. What they didn't know was that God had a plan to use this to fight the Philistines. One day, while Samson was walking to see the woman, a lion suddenly jumped out at him. But the Spirit of the Lord gave Samson great strength. He grabbed the lion with his bare hands and tore it apart like it was a small goat. Samson didn't tell anyone about this. Later, when he went back to marry the woman, he saw the dead lion again. Inside the lion, bees had made honey. Samson ate some of the honey and even gave some to his parents, but he didn't tell them where it came from. Samson's riddle. At Samson's wedding, he made a riddle for the Philistines. Samson, if you can guess my riddle in 7 days, I'll give you 30 sets of clothes. But if you can't guess it, you have to give me 30 sets of clothes. The Philistines agreed, and Samson told them the riddle. Samson, out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. The Philistines couldn't figure out the riddle, so they asked Samson's wife to find out the answer. She cried and begged Samson to tell her, and finally, he did. She told the Philistines, and they answered the riddle. Samson was angry because they cheated. He went to another town, and with God's strength, he defeated 30 Philistines, took their clothes, and gave them to the men who solved the riddle. Then he left in anger. Samson and the foxes. Later, Samson found out that his wife had been given to someone else. This made him even angrier. So he caught 300 foxes, tied their tails together in pairs, and put burning torches between their tails. He let the foxes run through the Philistines' fields, and they burned all their crops. The Philistines were so mad that they burned Samson's wife and her father. Samson got even more upset and fought the Philistines, hurting many of them. Afterward, he went to hide in a cave. Samson's great strength. The Philistines didn't give up. They came to the people of Judah and asked them to hand over Samson. The people of Judah were scared, so they went to the cave and tied Samson up with ropes to give him to the Philistines. But when the Philistines came to attack him, God's Spirit came upon Samson again, and he broke the ropes like they were thin pieces of string. He grabbed the jawbone of a donkey lying nearby and used it to fight the Philistines, defeating 1,000 of them. Samson and Delilah. As time went on, Samson fell in love with another woman named Delilah. But the Philistine rulers wanted to capture Samson, so they went to Delilah and offered her lots of money if she could find out the secret to his strength. Delilah asked Samson over and over, "Please tell me what makes you so strong." Samson played tricks on her at first. He told her things like, "If you tie me up with new ropes, I'll be weak," but every time, Samson would break free. Delilah kept asking him, until one day, Samson finally told her the truth. "Samson, My hair has never been cut because I am dedicated to God. If someone shaves my head, I will lose all my strength." Delilah saw that Samson was telling the truth this time. She waited until Samson fell asleep, then called a man to shave off his hair. When the Philistines came to capture him, Samson didn't know that his strength had left him. The Philistines grabbed him, took out his eyes, and put him in prison. Samson's last victory. While Samson was in prison, his hair started to grow back. One day, the Philistines had a big party in the temple of their god, Dagon, to celebrate that they had captured Samson. They brought Samson out of prison to make fun of him. Samson asked the servant boy to let him lean against the two big pillars holding up the temple. Then Samson prayed to God, "Samson, Lord, please give me strength one more time." God answered Samson's prayer. With all his might, Samson pushed the pillars, and the whole temple fell down. Samson died that day, but he also defeated all the Philistine rulers and many people in the temple. Even though Samson made many mistakes, God used him to save the Israelites from their enemies. The story of Ruth and Boaz. Once upon a time, a long time ago, there was a woman named Naomi who lived in a place called Bethlehem with her husband, Elimelech, and their two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. There was a terrible famine in their land, so Naomi and her family moved far away to a place called Moab, where there was food. They lived there for many years, but something very sad happened. First, Naomi's husband, Elimelech, died. Naomi was left with her two sons, who eventually got married to women from Moab. One of the wives was named Orpah, and the other was named Ruth. After about 10 years, another sad thing happened. Both of Naomi's sons died. Naomi was heartbroken. Now, it was just her and her two daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth. Naomi heard that the famine in her homeland of Bethlehem was over, so she decided to return. She told Orpah and Ruth, "You should go back to your own families. I'm too old to have more sons for you to marry." Orpah listened to Naomi, kissed her goodbye, and went back to her family. But Ruth didn't want to leave Naomi. She said, "I will go wherever you go. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die." Ruth loved Naomi very much and stayed with her. So Naomi and Ruth traveled back to Bethlehem together. When they arrived, the people there were surprised to see Naomi. They asked, "Is this Naomi?" Naomi said, "Don't call me Naomi anymore," which means pleasant. "Call me Mara," which means bitter, because God has made my life very sad. Naomi and Ruth arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the harvest season. Ruth wanted to help provide food for them, so she went to a field to pick up leftover grain. In those days, it was common for poor people to gather grain that had fallen behind after the workers harvested it. The field Ruth chose belonged to a man named Boaz, who was a relative of Naomi's late husband, Elimelech. Boaz noticed Ruth and asked his workers, "Who is that young woman?" They told him that she was the one who had come back with Naomi from Moab. Boaz had heard about how kind Ruth had been to Naomi, so he said to Ruth, "Don't go to any other fields to gather grain. Stay here with my workers. I've told my men not to bother you. When you're thirsty, drink from the water they have drawn." Ruth was so grateful and asked, "Why are you being so kind to me? I'm just a foreigner." Boaz replied, "I know all about what you've done for Naomi. May God bless you for your kindness." At mealtime, Boaz invited Ruth to eat with him and his workers. He gave her plenty of food, and she had leftovers to take home to Naomi. Boaz even told his workers to leave extra grain for Ruth to gather. When Ruth got home, Naomi was amazed at how much grain she had gathered. Ruth told Naomi about Boaz, and Naomi was very happy. She said, "Boaz is a close relative. He could help us." In those days, a close relative called a kinsman redeemer could help take care of family members in trouble. Naomi wanted Ruth to be taken care of, so she gave her some special instructions. She said, "Tonight, Boaz will be working on the threshing floor, where they separate grain. Wash yourself, put on your best clothes, and go to the threshing floor. But don't let Boaz see you until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down to sleep, go quietly, uncover his feet, and lie down. He will tell you what to do next." Ruth did everything Naomi told her to do. When Boaz woke up in the middle of the night, he was surprised to see Ruth lying at his feet. He asked, "Who are you?" Ruth said, "I am your servant Ruth. Please take care of me, for you are a close relative." Boaz was very kind and told her not to worry. He said, "There is another man who is a closer relative, but if he won't help you, I will." The next morning, Boaz went to the town gate, where business matters were discussed. He found the other relative and explained the situation, saying, "Naomi is selling the land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. You have the first chance to buy it, but if you don't want to, I will." The other man said, "I can't buy the land. You buy it." So Boaz agreed to buy the land and marry Ruth to take care of Naomi's family. Boaz and Ruth got married, and soon Ruth had a baby boy named Obed. Naomi was so happy to have a grandson. The women of the town said, "Praise God! Naomi now has a grandson to care for her in her old age." Obed grew up and had a son named Jesse. Jesse had a son named David, who became the great King David of Israel. And many, many years later, one of David's descendants was Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world. This is the beautiful story of how Ruth's kindness and faithfulness to Naomi were rewarded with love, family, and a special place in God's plan. The story of David. David, who lived in a small town called Bethlehem. David was the youngest son in his family, and he spent his days taking care of his father's sheep. He was a kind boy with a good heart, and even though he was young, God had big plans for him. One day, God told a prophet named Samuel to go to David's house. Samuel was a man who listened to God and did what God told him to do. God said to Samuel, "I want you to anoint a new king for my people." You see, the old king Saul had disobeyed God, and God wanted to choose a new king, someone who would love him and lead his people in the right way. So Samuel went to David's house. David had many older brothers, and they were all strong and tall. But when Samuel saw them, God said, "No, I have not chosen any of these." Finally, Samuel asked, "Is there another son?" David's father, Jesse, said, "Yes, my youngest son, David, is out in the fields taking care of the sheep." So they called David, and when he arrived, God told Samuel, "This is the one. Anoint him." Samuel poured oil on David's head, and from that day, God's Spirit was with David, preparing him for the big things that would come. Sometime later, a big battle was about to happen. The enemies of Israel, called the Philistines, sent out a huge warrior named Goliath. Goliath was taller and stronger than anyone else, and all the soldiers were afraid of him. He challenged the Israelites to send someone to fight him, but no one was brave enough to step forward. One day, David went to visit his brothers, who were soldiers in the army. When he saw Goliath and heard him making fun of God's people, David became very upset. He said, "I will fight this giant." Everyone was shocked because David was still young, but David trusted in God. He told the king, "The Lord who helped me protect my sheep from lions and bears will help me defeat Goliath." David didn't wear any armor or carry a sword like the soldiers. Instead, he took his sling, 5 smooth stones, and went to face Goliath. When Goliath saw David, he laughed and said, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" But David wasn't afraid. He said, "You come to me with a sword and spear, but I come to you in the name of the Lord Almighty." Then David put a stone in his sling, swung it around, and let it fly. The stone hit Goliath right on the forehead, and the giant fell down. David had won, and the people cheered because God had given him the victory. After defeating Goliath, David became very popular. Everyone loved him, even the king's son, Jonathan, who became his best friend. But King Saul, the king of Israel, grew jealous of David because the people were saying, "David is stronger and greater than Saul." So Saul tried to hurt David many times, but David always escaped. David trusted God and never tried to hurt Saul, even though he had many chances to do so. David respected Saul because he was still the king chosen by God. Many years later, Saul died in a battle, and the people made David their new king. David was a good king, and God blessed him in everything he did. David won many battles, and the people were happy. But even though David loved God, he made some big mistakes. One day, David saw a beautiful woman named Bathsheba. She was already married to a man named Uriah, but David wanted her to be his wife. So David did a bad thing. He sent Uriah to the front of a battle where he would be killed. Then, David married Bathsheba. But God was not happy with what David had done, and he sent a prophet named Nathan to tell David that what he did was wrong. David felt very sorry for his sins. He prayed to God and asked for forgiveness, saying, "I have sinned against the Lord." God forgave David because he saw how sorry David was, but there were still consequences for David's actions. Even though David was forgiven, he faced a lot of sadness in his family. His first baby with Bathsheba died, and later his own sons fought with each other. But David never stopped loving God, and he wrote many songs and prayers, called Psalms, to praise God and ask for his help. One of these psalms is Psalm 51, where David asked God to create a clean heart in him and to forgive his sins. He prayed, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me." David lived a long life and ruled as king for many years. When he grew old, he knew his time to die was near. He called his son Solomon and gave him wise advice, saying, "Be strong and follow God's ways, and he will bless you." After David died, Solomon became king, and David's family continued to be important because one day, a very special person would be born from David's family line. That person was Jesus, who is the Savior of the world. David's story teaches us that God looks at our hearts, not at how big or strong we are. It also shows us that even when we make mistakes, God loves us and is ready to forgive us if we ask for his forgiveness. David was known as a man after God's own heart because he always tried to love God and follow him, even when he did something wrong. God has a plan for each of us, just like he had a plan for David. Thank you for watching. If this is your first time of watching my video, I want to encourage you to smash the like button, subscribe to my channel, and most importantly, turn on the bell notification button so that YouTube will send you notification when I post the next video.